Suggested visual: fast-paced, high-contrast B-roll of the ultra-modern Dubai skyline, cutting sharply from the gleaming Burj Khalifa to a heavily weathered, dark glass skyscraper looming silently over a busy intersection in the edge of Business Bay. Bold, white text flashes on screen, the 250 million thousand, mistake, Sanbeat, urgent cable news-style trumpet fanfare intro, subsiding into a low, thudding synth bass beat, narrator right now, in the heart of Dubai. A 45-story luxury skyscraper stands completely dark, sealed, and hollow. For 24 years, this massive vertical column of glass and concrete has sat entirely empty, watching the city grow into a global superpower around it. Today, Dubai's authorities are facing an unprecedented, staggering dilemma. Do they spend $30 million to completely demolish a structure that the tax and market assessors value at less than $3 million in its current state? Or do they risk an eye-watering $250 million to somehow bring it back to life? This isn't just an eyesore on the edge of the desert. This is a 531-foot column of extreme liability hanging over one of the absolute busiest thoroughfares of downtown Dubai, just a block away from where millions of international tourists and wealthy investors walked during last year's massive global expos and luxury shopping festivals. Consider three terrifying numbers that define this engineering catastrophe. First, 24. That is the exact number of years this tower has sat completely abandoned, sealed shut behind rusted security fences. That is longer than some of the young professionals walking past its shadow today have even been alive. Second, $220,000. That is the daily fine that municipal authorities eventually piled onto the building's wealthy owner for his absolute refusal to remediate the structure or secure its rapidly deteriorating exterior. And third, $30 million. That is the minimum price tag estimated just to safely dismantle and implode a super tall structure that is officially valued at a fraction of that cost. Let that ratio sink in for a second. It costs roughly 10 times more to erase this engineering disaster from the Dubai skyline than the actual structure is officially worth on paper. So, how does a mega-project skyscraper that was explicitly designed to define a glamorous Middle Eastern skyline become the single most expensive mistake in a modern metropolis's real estate portfolio? How does a monument to luxury transform into a locale's dead zone that nobody can fix, nobody can sell, and nobody can even safely knock down? To understand this catastrophic failure, we have to pull back the layers of Dubai's rapid vertical evolution. We have to look at what happens when the relentless speed of high-rise construction collides with extreme desert heat, moisture infiltration, and structural abandonment. This is the untold story of a luxury dream turned into a multi-million-dollar urban nightmare, where falling facade panels threaten pedestrians below, and where the legal and physical gridlock was only broken by a sudden, tragic twist of fate. This is the anatomy of a 24-year structural collapse in slow motion. Suggested visual: archival photographs and early digital renderings of Dubai from the mid to late 1960s and 1970s. The screen transitions from flat, dusty landscapes with traditional coastal buildings to dramatic time lapses of massive concrete foundations being poured in the intense desert sun. Text on screen: 1964, the architect's vision, soundbite, dramatic, driven 70s style, electronic beat blends with traditional Middle Eastern string strums. Narrator: to understand how a 531-foot vertical tomb could exist in a city world-renowned for hyper-luxury, you have to rewind the clock all the way to 1964, long before the Burj Khalifa shattered global records, and decades before the artificial islands of the Palm Jumeirah era were dredged from the Persian Gulf. Dubai was a trading port with a massive, unquenchable thirst for modern identity. Enter a visionary, highly confident developer named Sam Rasail. Rasail wasn't interested in building just another low-rise commercial trading block or a standard concrete villa complex near the creek. He wanted to build the building. He envisioned a towering, ultra-modern masterwork that would drag Dubai's skyline into the modern global age through sheer vertical dominance. It was designed to be a definitive glass and marble statement, the tallest tower the region had ever seen. To achieve this, Rusal hired the prestigious design firm of architect Leonard Spangenberg. Spangenberg wasn't just any conventional draftsman. He was a highly respected designer who had trained directly under the legendary architectural pioneer Frank Lloyd Wright. On paper, the blueprint was an absolute masterclass in mid-century modernism adapted for a booming urban center. It combined a sleek, forward-looking silhouette with massive, opulent marble panels and sweeping glass curtains designed to reflect the Arabian sun. It was exactly the kind of unbridled architectural ambition that a rapidly growing desert metropolis was supposed to have. And for a brief, shining moment, the grand plan actually worked. When the structural skeleton of the Plaza Tower finally topped out, it didn't just claim the title of the tallest building in its immediate business district. It stood as the absolute tallest skyscraper in the entire United Arab Emirates. It was an engineering marvel that could be seen for miles across the low-slung desert landscape. But here is the very first thing that the glossy marketing brochures and the grand press announcements never mentioned. The tower almost didn't get built at all. The project was plagued by severe systemic flaws before the concrete had even fully cured. In October 1966, with the massive vertical structure only partway up, the money ran out. The developer's ambitious financial projections collapsed under the weight of escalating material costs and the immense logistical challenges of importing high-end architectural components to the region. Construction stopped, suggested visual. High-contrast drone footage circling a weathered, skeletal structure. Fast cuts showing rusted rebar and exposed, unfinished concrete floors buffeted by blowing desert sand. For 2 agonizing years, the half-finished concrete skeleton stood frozen and silent over the central business area. It became a stark, highly public monument to over-leverage, battered by intense sandstorms and soaring summer temperatures, while the entire project stalled in legal and financial limbo. The tower changed hands multiple times behind closed doors until an aggressive group of new institutional investors stepped in to buy out the original debt, finally restarting the heavy machinery in 1968. Soundbite. Heavy industrial clangs mixed with cynically tense synth. Work was pushed to its absolute limit, and the tower was officially completed in 1969. But think about what that initial delay tells you about the building's fundamental DNA. Long before a single tenant ever signed a lease or moved an office desk into the upper floors, this structure had already taught the city a brutal lesson. Its developer's architectural ambition was vastly bigger than his bank account. That profound, systemic gap between what the Plaza Tower was supposed to be and what anyone could actually afford to maintain is the structural crack that runs through this entire 24-year nightmare. For a few decades, that crack stayed quiet. As Dubai's economy shifted into overdrive during the 1970s and 1980s, the tower filled up completely. The glamour faded, but the utility remained. Major government agencies, corporate headquarters, and even the city's senior legal and administrative offices set up shop inside the 45-story giant. By the late 1980s, the original dream of a breathtaking, world-class mixed-use icon had quietly transitioned into what most aging skyscrapers eventually become: a dense, uninspiring stack of fluorescent-lit corporate cubicles. It wasn't glamorous, but it was highly functional, fully occupied, and generating millions in consistent rental revenue. And then the boat started making its occupants sick. Suggested visual: macro shots of modern air conditioning vents clogged with thick, dark grime, transitioning to graphics demonstrating how microscopic airborne hazards circulate through a sealed central HVAC system by the early 2000s. Hundreds of employees working inside the upper tiers of the Plaza Tower began reporting severe, chronic health issues. Headaches, sudden respiratory distress, unexplainable fatigue, and persistent allergic reactions became a daily reality across multiple floors. At first, management waved the complaints away as standard office fatigue or routine seasonal viruses, but the symptoms only grew worse, eventually triggering a full-scale environmental investigation of the tower's sealed internal climate systems. The culprits turned out to be 2 of the most notorious, feared words in commercial real estate: asbestos and toxic mold, To fully understand the engineering disaster that followed, you have to understand one vital principle of high-rise climate control in an extreme environment like Dubai. The primary danger with structural asbestos isn't the physical material sitting completely still and undisturbed behind a solid wall panel. The true danger occurs when that material becomes friable, meaning it gets dry, brittle, and crumbles into microscopic dust that breaks loose, floating directly into the air filtration systems. In a properly maintained, modern building, those hazardous materials are kept completely sealed, isolated, and stable. But an aging tower subjected to decades of intense exterior heat expansion and systemic maintenance neglect does the exact opposite. It turns its own internal insulation into a toxic substance that its occupants inhale with every breath. The Plaza Plot Tower was suffering from a catastrophic moisture problem because of Dubai's immense coastal humidity and extreme summer heat. The temperature differential between the heavily air-conditioned interior and the scorching outdoor air creates an absolute battleground on a building's outer envelope. If a tower's facade isn't meticulously maintained, sealants fail. The Plaza Tower was leaking severely. Condensation and external moisture were migrating deep into the perimeter walls, creating an ideal breeding ground for toxic mold while simultaneously degrading the structural fireproofing insulation. The building was, in the most literal engineering sense, breaking down from the inside out. So, in 2002, the final, inevitable hammer dropped. Around 7 by corporate and municipal employees, including the entire administrative legal headquarters, packed up their files, walked out of the building, and relocated en masse to alternative commercial developments downtown. The main breakers were flipped. The heavy glass doors were locked. The perimeter was sealed. At the time, the closure was explicitly presented to the public as a brief temporary measure to allow for comprehensive environmental cleaning. Suggested visual: a slow, dramatic pullback shot showing the entire 45-story tower standing completely dark at night, juxtaposed against the brightly illuminated, glittering skyscrapers surrounding it. Now, ask yourself the exact question that the city's real estate regulators and building owners should have asked themselves that fateful year. You have a massive 45-story skyscraper that is still fundamentally structurally sound, positioned in a prime, high-value commercial corridor, completely emptied out over a localized environmental hazard that can absolutely be remediated with the right application of money, engineering expertise, and effort. What is the responsible move? The responsible move is to deploy remediation crews instantly, fix the containment failure fast, and seal the envelope before an empty building transitions into a rotting one. Make no mistake. Those are two entirely different physical states. An empty building is merely paused. Its systems are preserved, its structural integrity is monitored, and its value is protected. A rotting building, however, is actively dying, and the critical difference between a temporary pause and a terminal structural decline is measured in exactly the two resources that nobody involved in the Plaza Tower wanted to spend: time and continuous maintenance capital. Instead of launching an immediate, aggressive restoration campaign, the ownership chose to wait. They chose to engage in prolonged asset standoffs, legal finger-pointing, and financial stalling. And waiting, as the city of Dubai would soon find out, is the single most expensive decision a skyscraper owner can ever make. But here is the shocking twist that nobody told the public during the decades of abandonment that followed. The toxic mold and the crumbling asbestos. The highly publicized, official reasons this massive tower was completely evacuated and abandoned in 2002 were actually cleaned up and fully remediated years ago. Specialized hazardous material teams had quietly entered the building under strict containment protocols, stripping out the contaminated elements and leaving behind a completely gutted, safe structural shell. This means that for the vast majority of the last 2 decades, the building's primary stated excuse for remaining an empty, hollow ghost tower over a bustling business district no longer even existed. The poison was entirely gone. So, if the immediate environmental hazard had been completely neutralized, why did the Plaza Tower continue to sit dark and rot for 24 straight years? Because cleaning out the friable asbestos was actually the easy, inexpensive part of the equation, turning a completely gutted 45-story vertical concrete shell back into a functional, modern luxury building compliant with updated municipal safety codes is the monumental engineering challenge that has financially broken every single developer who has ever stepped up to try. And plenty of ambitious figures did try. Over the course of 24 years, a continuous parade of magnificent, high-profile redevelopment plans was floated to the public. There were grand proposals to convert the tower into hyper-luxury residential condos. There were slick marketing campaigns rebranding the structure with a glittering new name, featuring a neo-modern, aerodynamic glass facade designed to look right at home next to the city's newest architectural marvels. Multi-million-dollar renderings were produced by world-class design agencies, and triumphant press releases were sent out to international real estate journals. Each new plan confidently promised that this time, the historic Plaza Tower would finally come back to life as a crowning achievement of urban renewal, and every single one of those elaborate plans collapsed under its own weight before a single new concrete floor could be finished or a single sheet of glass could be installed. The financial numbers simply never added up. The cost of retrofitting an aging, late 1960s structure to support modern mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems, while battling decades of structural neglect, turned the property into a commercial death trap for traditional investment groups. Suggested visual, a dramatic split screen showing a flawless, hyper-polished digital rendering of a revitalized glass tower on the left, contrasting sharply with raw, handheld footage of cracked concrete, peeling finishes, and rusted structural elements on the right. Then, in 2014, a major hotel and commercial developer named Joe Yeager stepped into the arena, buying the entire property. Yeager wasn't a speculative outsider or a minor middleman. He was a highly serious, incredibly wealthy local player who owned and operated a massive portfolio of real, operating luxury properties across the city. He possessed the deep pockets, the established political connections, and the development track record that everyone assumed would finally break the building's decades-long curse. The year before Yeager finalized the acquisition, the tower had been officially added to historical preservation registers, a major regulatory milestone that unlocked a massive chest of highly valuable tax incentives and development credits. His ultimate vision for the site was bold, comprehensive, and heavily marketed: 90 high-end luxury apartments, a 200-room boutique luxury hotel, and a massive integrated parking structure. It was the exact same familiar, golden architectural dream being spun one more time for the public. And one more time, as the years began to tick away, absolutely nothing happened on the ground. No construction crews arrived. No heavy cranes were erected. Years passed in complete, uninterrupted silence, with no meaningful structural renovation taking place behind the security walls. Meanwhile, the severe physical and human cost of all that continuous corporate inaction completely stopped being a theoretical financial debate. This is the exact turning point in the timeline that should make any resident or structural engineer furious. In May 2021, the physical reality of a 45-story building being left to decay in an extreme climate finally caught up with the city. An intense storm system moving through downtown Dubai brought high-velocity winds that battered the tower's unmaintained exterior envelope. The extreme wind forces caught the heavy, neglected marble panels that decorated the building's face, panels whose structural anchoring systems had been quietly corroding and loosening over decades of thermal expansion and moisture ingress. With a sickening crack, massive slabs of heavy stone were torn completely loose from the building's upper tiers, hurtling hundreds of feet through the air, directly down into the crowded streets below. Soundbeat, a sudden, shocking audio drop, replaced by the loud, echoing smash of stone hitting asphalt, followed by the urgent, piercing wail of emergency sirens. Picture that terrifying reality. You are an ordinary citizen, simply riding a bicycle or walking through your own downtown business district on a windy afternoon, and a massive solid piece of an abandoned skyscraper's facade comes crashing out of the sky, striking you down on the pavement. A cyclist was severely injured, suffering devastating trauma from the falling debris. The immediate public safety fallout was massive. Municipal authorities were forced to instantly shut down major multi-lane thoroughfares, completely choking the traffic flow of downtown out of sheer terror over what else might detach from the upper floors. Falling debris instantly transformed from a theoretical maintenance issue into an active, recurring tactical threat every single time the wind speed picked up. The dying building was now lashing out at the vibrant city surrounding it. Not long after the facade failure, a dangerous fire broke out within the unmonitored interior spaces, requiring an aggressive response from emergency services. And in a tragic escalation of the human cost, a man later lost his life after infiltrating the unsecured perimeter and falling from the upper heights of the vacant tower. This is the grim, unavoidable reality of what a rotting super-tall building does to an urban environment. It completely ceases to be just one private owner's financial problem or a quiet line item on a corporate balance sheet. It evolves into everyone's immediate physical danger, holding an entire downtown district hostage. And what about the regulatory authorities who were explicitly tasked with preventing this exact type of urban decay? In the immediate aftermath of the 2021 facade failure, the city's enforcement branches issued a series of official code violations to Jaeger's development entity. But the total financial penalty, levied for 11 separate, highly severe structural safety violations, amounted to a grand total of around $4,000. To the multimillionaire owner of a downtown skyscraper portfolio, that is not a meaningful deterrent. That is not a penalty. That is a rounding error. That is nothing more than a glorified parking ticket. It was a laughably inadequate response to a crisis that was rapidly spinning out of control, setting the stage for a massive legal and financial showdown that would push the city's legal framework to its absolute limits. Suggested visual: panoramic drone shot of a sprawling, high-density cluster of towers near Sheikh Zayed Road in Business Bay, highlighting several half-built concrete skeletons surrounded by cranes. A graphic map overlay highlights these sites in a harsh red glow, with bold text across the screen: the illusion of immunity. Sonbit industrial techno beat with a low, steady, clinically horrific drone narrator. Here is the part of the story that proves the Plaza Tower was never just an isolated incident or a bizarre, one-off engineering fluke. If you walk through the glittering corridors of Dubai, it is incredibly easy to get swept up in the grand illusion of total architectural immunity. We look at the smooth glass surfaces, the automated external washing systems, and the hyper-efficient engineering grid, and we assume that a city built this fast, with this much capital, must be completely invulnerable to systemic decay. But structural engineering doesn't care about a city's branding campaigns. And gravity doesn't care about a developer's net worth. The terrifying reality is that the Plaza Tower isn't alone. It is merely the most famous, most visible member of an exclusive, deeply troubled group of long-neglected megastructures that municipal insiders and urban planning consultants unofficially refer to as the Dirty Dozen. This is a quiet, heavily scrutinized roster of massive, blighted high-rises and stalled mega-developments scattered across various pockets of the Emirates. Structures that have been left to bake and rot in the extreme desert sun for years, even decades, while international investment funds, local shell companies, and municipal enforcement entities pass the legal liabilities back and forth like a hot potato. Every single major construction boom leaves behind a ghost fleet of abandoned ambitions. When economic cycles shift, or when initial engineering assessments fail to account for the true logistical costs of operating in an unforgiving climate, mega projects stall. And once a tower of this scale stalls, restarting the momentum becomes exponentially more difficult with every passing year. The Plaza Tower is simply the tallest, most dangerous symptom of a much wider structural disease. And just when you think the situation couldn't possibly get any more legally or financially absurd, consider what happened when municipal authorities finally ran out of patience and decided to tally up the statutory daily non-compliance fines for letting this 45-story monument to neglect deteriorate in full view of the public. When the final account, ING ledger, was tallied, The cumulative penalties slapped onto the building's ownership had spiraled to a mind-boggling $220,000 per day. Let that sink in. That is not a lifetime accumulation. That is not a cumulative annual corporate fine. That was a compounding daily penalty meant to act as a financial nuclear deterrent. But when a regulatory system lets a problem fester for over 2 decades, the numbers stop behaving like real money and start looking like mathematical fiction. The total penalties stacked against this single structural carcass completely outran its own actual market value by millions of dollars. By 2023, the city's administrative patience had completely evaporated. The Inspector General's office publicly and aggressively called out the ownership group, filing a blistering report that noted there had been absolutely no meaningful physical effort to renovate, secure, or stabilize the property in more than 6 consecutive years. The structure was actively bleeding value, and more importantly, it was actively threatening the economic vitality of the surrounding commercial zone. The city immediately escalated its legal assault, slapping a massive, 6-figure structural lien onto the property. This wasn't just a punitive fine. This was an active cost recovery mechanism. The municipality was forcing the owner's estate to pay for the massive physical barricades and overhead protective scaffolding that the city had been forced to install around the base of the tower just to keep ordinary pedestrians from being decapitated by falling marble slabs. Furthermore, the lien sought to recover the immense amount of municipal parking and commercial tax revenue lost because the entire perimeter had been turned into an active, barricaded danger zone. When that failed to move the needle, the authorities finally resorted to the absolute nuclear option in urban planning, a mandatory demolition order. Suggested visual, architectural cross-sections of a 500-foot tower showing the immense complexity of an urban implosion. Graphics illustrate the proximity of neighboring occupied luxury towers and subterranean transport tunnels. In December 2024, the Municipal Council officially approved a massive $2.7 million initial contract with a highly specialized international demolition and engineering firm, Renascent. Their immediate directive was not to bring the building down right away, but to begin the incredibly hazardous process of structural abatement and emergency engineering assessment. The full price tag floated by structural engineers just to safely dismantle and tear down the entire quarter-mile-high concrete mass was estimated at an astonishing $30 million. Think about the sheer engineering nightmare of knocking down a 45-story skyscraper in the middle of a hyperdense, active downtown business district. You cannot simply roll in with a massive wrecking ball and start swinging. You cannot easily blast it into a neat pile of dust with standard commercial explosives without sending a catastrophic seismic shockwave through the delicate, sandy foundations of the multi-billion-dollar luxury towers standing right next to it, or shattering the specialized, double-glazed glass curtains of every corporate office within a 5-block radius. Every single floor would have to be painstakingly unbuilt from the top down, piece by piece, inside a massive, fully enclosed cocoon of protective netting, while engineers constantly monitored the structural integrity of a compromised concrete frame. In January 2025, a senior municipal judge cleared the legal path for the crews to begin. Predictably, the owner's highly paid legal team launched an emergency counteroffensive, filing a frantic request for an immediate restraining order to halt the incoming wrecking crews and protect their real estate asset. But the legal shielding that had protected the tower for 24 years finally failed. The judge sided entirely with the city, issuing a definitive, landmark ruling stating that the structural degradation of the tower constituted an imminent, unacceptable risk to the lives of the general public. Within mere weeks of the court order, the downtown area witnessed a truly surreal sight. Teams of highly trained structural engineers and industrial technicians were seen rappelling down the heavily weathered, dark glass face of the tower like extreme mountaineers, scaling a sheer desert cliff face. They were deployed to manually map out every single crack in the concrete, every loose structural anchor, and every failing facade seam, calculating exactly how to safely take a quarter mile of vertical liability apart without bringing the heart of the business district crashing down with it. Suggested visual: rapid-fire montage of different corporate logos, legal documents, and silhouettes of executives, emphasizing the distributed nature of the blame. So, when an engineering disaster of this scale paralyzes a global metropolis for nearly a quarter of a century, who is actually held accountable? Who do you point the finger at? That is the most deeply uncomfortable, frustrating answer in this entire saga. There is no single, easily identifiable villain in this story. Instead, there is a continuous, interconnected chain of them spanning over 4 decades. It started with a pioneering developer whose grand architectural ambition drastically outran his actual liquid funding in 1966. It was perpetuated by a revolving door of investment syndicates and corporate owners across 40 years, who repeatedly promised the city a triumphant vertical revival, but delivered nothing but shiny digital renderings and empty promotional press releases. It was exacerbated by a billionaire hotel mogul who sat on the decomposing asset for a decade, refusing to execute a realistic development plan while the statutory code fines remained laughably small enough to be ignored. And finally, the blame lands squarely on a bureaucratic regulatory system that treated a failing, marble-faced super-tall skyscraper like nothing more than an unkempt lawn or a minor property nuisance, until chunks of stone started falling out of the sky and striking citizens down on the pavement. And as it always does in these massive engineerings, catastrophes, the ultimate financial aftermath lands directly on the shoulders of the public. The multi-million-dollar daily fines piled up by the city were largely symbolic, ink on a legal document that could never be fully collected from a shell company. The continuous cost of the emergency street sweepers, the heavy security barricades, the structural assessments, and the impending $30 million demolition bill represent tens of millions of dollars in direct public financial exposure, all for a building that was being taxed as if it were worth practically nothing. And the current status of this architect? Euro crisis? After all of those dramatic court battles, the massive fines, the historic judicial wins, and the arrival of the advanced demolition crews, the city suddenly paused the entire operation, because right at the edge of the abyss, the entire narrative shifted on a dime. Suggested visual: a slow-motion, moody tracking shot sweeping across the empty, dust-choked executive suites of the tower's upper floors. Sunlight streams through dirty, cracked glass window panes, illuminating decades of undisturbed dust and discarded corporate paperwork. Text on screen: the breaking point. Soundbite: minimalist. Solitary piano chords interwoven with a low, steady humming sound from an atmospheric synth slider. Before I tell you exactly how this 24-year architectural gridlock ends, there is one critical, deeply personal detail that changes absolutely everything you think you know about this case. When you look at the immense scale of a 45-story engineering disaster, it is incredibly easy to get completely lost in the sheer physics of the structure. We talk about concrete carbonation, facade wind loads, the logistics of heavy demolition, and the cold, unfeeling mathematics of municipal lines. We treat the building like an autonomous, malevolent force that is simply decaying on its own accord. But skyscrapers do not build themselves, they do not neglect themselves, and they certainly do not lock themselves into a 20-year state of legal paralysis. Human beings do that. Behind every single failing structural column and every single peeling exterior panel, there is a human ego, a boardroom standoff, or a calculated financial gamble. And in the bizarre saga of Dubai's Plaza Tower, the single event that finally broke a multi-decade, multi-million-dollar stalemate wasn't a sweeping municipal lawsuit. It wasn't a crushing daily fine, an aggressive government decree, or an imminent demolition order from a senior judge. It was a sudden, violent death. To fully understand the human gridlock that held this entire 531-foot tower hostage, you have to look directly at the man who held the physical keys to the front gates for an entire decade. The ultra-wealthy hotel and real estate mogul, Joe Yeager. When Yeager bought the rotting shell of the Plaza Tower back in 2014, he didn't view it as a dangerous urban liability or a structural ticking time bomb. To his highly calculated, aggressively ambitious entrepreneurial mind, The tower was an absolute golden ticket. It was a distressed, deeply discounted trophy asset sitting on one of the most high-traffic, strategically vital commercial corners of a booming global metropolis. Because the building had been officially placed on historical preservation registers, Yeager sat on a goldmine of theoretical tax credits and structural development incentives. His public relations teams spun an absolutely flawless narrative for the international press and local authorities. They spoke passionately about architectural stewardship, the preservation of the city's early vertical heritage, and a grand, multi-million-dollar vision to inject modern luxury back into the aging concrete frame. They promised to transform the dark, empty monument to neglect into a vibrant, high-end, mixed-use ecosystem featuring 90 ultra-luxury apartments, a sprawling 200-room boutique hotel, and a state-of-the-art integrated parking facility designed to cater to Dubai's elite. It was a beautiful, compelling corporate dream. But as the years began to march forward, the stark reality behind the scenes turned out to be vastly different from the polished marketing brochures. Suggested visual, close-up of complex, multi-layered corporate organizational charts, flashing legal terminology like shell, company, holding ethy, and a set insulation onto the screen over images of courtrooms. The truth is that transforming a completely gutted, structurally compromised late 1960s skyscraper into a compliant, ultra-luxury modern development is an absolute financial suicide mission for a traditional developer. Every single time Yeager's engineering consultants and structural specialists went inside the tower to draft actual construction blueprints, they ran into a brick wall of escalating regulatory requirements and astronomical retrofitting costs to meet modern municipal building codes and civil defense safety standards. The tower didn't just need a cosmetic facelift or a new layer of exterior glass. It required a complete radical overhaul of its entire internal nervous system. The aging structural columns had to be heavily reinforced to handle updated seismic protections metrics. The building's entire vertical core needed to be completely ripped open and restructured to accommodate high-speed, modern elevator shafts and pressurized emergency escape stairwells. The primitive, corroded mechanical, electrical, and plumbing infrastructure had to be completely designed from scratch to support the immense power and water demands of a modern luxury hotel. And then there was the ongoing battle against the brutal desert climate. Decades of unmitigated moisture infiltration and extreme thermal expansion had caused widespread, deep-seated concrete spalling throughout the perimeter frame, meaning the embedded steel rebar was actively rusting and expanding, cracking the very concrete that was supposed to protect it. When Yeager's accounting teams ran the actual, non-compromised financial projections, the numbers were utterly terrifying. The total cost of executing a complete code-compliant structural restoration was rapidly approaching the cost of building a brand-new, hyper-modern super-tall tower from the ground up on raw land. Faced with these impossible economics, the project stalled out completely. But instead of cutting his losses, admitting defeat, and selling the property to someone with a different risk tolerance, Yeager completely dug his heels in. Soundbite tense. Clock-like ticking synthesis with an increasingly aggressive drone. For 10 straight years, nothing could move the Plaza Tower because one single, incredibly stubborn man absolutely refused to let it go. Yeager was a legendary, old-school real estate player who was utterly convinced that he could outweight the market, out-negotiate the municipal regulators, and outmaneuver the legal system. He firmly believed that the sheer land value of the prime downtown corner would eventually make his asset incredibly valuable, regardless of how much the actual building on top of it continued to rot and shed marble slabs onto the streets below. Whenever international investment funds or local development consortiums approached Yeager with serious offers to buy out the proper tie, he rejected them out of hand. He demanded exorbitant, completely unrealistic acquisition terms and astronomical valuations that no sane real estate investor would ever agree to take on, especially given the tens of dollars in immediate, mandatory structural liabilities that came attached to the deed. He completely isolated the asset inside a complex web of holding companies and legal shields. effectively locking the entire city out. The municipality could pile on all the symbolic code violations and daily non-compliance fines they wanted. But Jaeger's legal team would simply tie the penalties up in endless appellate court loops and bureaucratic reviews for years on end. The building was completely paralyzed by the sheer force of one man's absolute refusal to compromise. The city was held hostage, the surrounding business district was forced to endure an active danger zone, and the structural integrity of a 45-story skyscraper continued to slide down a terminal path of decay. It was an absolute, unbreakable stalemate that looked like it would continue to plague Dubai's skyline for decades to come, until June 2024, on an ordinary afternoon. The news rippled through Dubai's corporate real estate sector like a massive shockwave. Joe Jaeger, the powerful billionaire tycoon who had held the absolute keys to the city's most famous ghost tower for a decade, was suddenly killed in a violent, catastrophic car accident in a single split second. The entire chessboard was completely wiped clean, and that is the profound, incredibly dark twist that this entire 24-year saga completely turns on. For 10 long years, no amount of public outcry, municipal pressure, structural danger, or economic sense could move a single stone on the Plaza Tower, because its owner simply would not budge. Jaeger's sudden death didn't just bring an end to a powerful tycoon's life, it instantly unlocked the frozen destiny of the building itself. Suggested visual, graphic transition representing a changing of the guard. The stark, imposing silhouette of a single executive fades away, replaced by an abstract, multi-lane corporate highway, representing a major investment fund structure. The moment Jaeger was gone, the asset fell into the hands of his corporate estate, which was placed under the direct control of an institutional trustee. Unlike the late tycoon, the trustee didn't have a deep, personal ego invested in the tower. They didn't care about a 10-year-old developer's pride or a desire to outweight the municipal authorities. They looked at the asset through the cold, objective, and unfeeling lens of fiduciary liability and risk management. And what they saw on the corporate ledger was an absolute nightmare. They saw a 531-foot liability that was actively shedding heavy masonry onto public roads. They saw a compounding mountain of municipal liens, a looming $30 million mandatory demolition mandate from a senior judge, and an international public relations disaster that was actively threatening to drain the liquidity of the entire estate. The trustee did the one exact thing that Joe Jaeger had spent an entire decade absolutely refusing to do. They stopped fighting the city, they dropped the unrealistic property valuations, and they actively sought an immediate, total exit strategy. In the high-stakes summer of 2025, the estate officially closed a monumental, quiet deal to completely divest the property. The buyer wasn't another speculative luxury hotel mogul or a high-end commercial developer looking to build more empty penthouses for international billionaires. Instead, the tower was purchased by a massive, highly specialized California-based affordable housing development corporation that partnered directly with an aggressive, well-capitalized local UAE construction group. Almost immediately after the ink dried on the deed, the new ownership group stood before the municipal planning authorities and announced a truly staggering, counterintuitive $250 million master plan. Their goal? To completely cancel the impending demolition order, retract the wrecking crews, and execute a total structural conversion to transform the rotting, toxic ghost tower into a massive, state-of-the-art residential complex featuring roughly 300 modern apartments designed exclusively for low-income seniors and essential workers. Suggest visual, a fast, sweeping visual loop illustrating the complete history of the building, from the 1960s luxury dream to the 2000s toxic evacuation to the 2021 falling debris crisis, and finally to a warm, bright digital rendering of seniors walking through a landscaped podium park. So follow the incredible, dizzying full circle of this multi-decade engineering catastrophe, the exact same building that the entire city, the public, the media, and the municipal courts had fought aggressively for years to completely tear down, implode, and erase from the face of the earth has suddenly become the exact building that the city's urban planners are now fighting tooth and nail to protect and save. The ultimate architectural eyesore of downtown Dubai is being radically repositioned as the ultimate urban rescue mission. But sit with the true, uncomfortable weight of that resolution for a second. The one single thing that finally made this historic, multi-million-dollar urban renewal project possible wasn't a breakthrough in engineering technology. It wasn't a masterclass in urban planning policy or a sudden wave of civic responsibility from the developer. It was the tragic, sudden physical loss of the one single man who was holding the keys to the gate. A massive skyscraper that could not be saved, sold, or remediated while its powerful owner was alive was suddenly saved, maybe, just maybe, only because he was no longer around to stop it. Suggested visual. Slow, cinematic drone shot rising from the base of the tower all the way up past its weathered roofline, capturing the expansive, sun-drenched landscape of the modern city below. The screen fades into sharp text overlays displaying cold financial ledgers. Text on screen, The Reckoning. Soundbite, syncopted, driven electronic beat infused, with an atmospheric Middle Eastern instrumental undertow narrator. As the dust finally begins to settle on this extraordinary saga, we are left staring at a massive 531-foot monument that teaches us a brutal truth about the global race toward the sky. Here is what the Plaza Tower really is, undeniable. Concrete proof that doing absolutely nothing in the world of mega-project engineering is never free, every single year, that we look at a massive structural failure and decide to let it rot because the immediate, upfront cost of fixing it feels too expensive. The bill does not magically disappear. It doesn't dissolve into the desert sand, and it doesn't vanish behind a veil of corporate shell companies. Instead, it quietly compounds behind closed doors. It gains interest in the form of accelerated structural decay, corroded anchoring systems, environmental degradation, and escalating public risk. It builds momentum until an abandoned building that a tax assessor officially values at less than $3 million suddenly costs a staggering $250 million to safely bring back from the dead. This is the ultimate structural reckoning facing the world's most rapidly constructed supercities today. The true cost of an architectural dream isn't measured solely by the capital injected during the initial, glamorous groundbreaking ceremony, or the champagne poured when the structure finally tops out. The true test of an engineering marvel is how it ages, how it adapts, and who pays the ultimate price when the momentum grinds to a complete halt. For 24 agonizing years, the city of Dubai had to absorb the physical, visual, and financial liabilities of a 45-story mistake. The public had to navigate around barricaded streets, dodge falling marble facade panels on windy afternoons, and watch a prime corridor of their central business district turn into an unproductive, dangerous dead zone. And while a radical, $250 million affordable housing rescue mission offers a truly remarkable, cinematic happy ending to this specific nightmare, it also leaves behind a series of incredibly urgent, deeply uncomfortable structural questions that every major metropolitan hub must answer before the next economic downturn hits. Because the Plaza Tower is not an isolated monument in time. Across the globe, from the high-density waterfronts of the Palm Jumeirah to the hyper-scaled commercial grids of Business Bay, skyscrapers are aging simultaneously. Facades are weathering, sealants are expanding and contracting in extreme climates, and ownership structures are fracturing into complex legal webs that can take decades to untangle in a court of law. We cannot afford to wait for a tragic twist of fate or a sudden, violent boardroom vacancy to break every single real estate stalemate that threatens our streets. Suggested visual. The camera slowly pulls back into the upper atmosphere, watching the entire glittering skyline fade into the distant horizon as a comment box graphic appears on screen. So, now the ultimate question lands squarely on you. When a private developer lets a massive city landmark die this slowly, holding an entire downtown district hostage while its bones turn into a public safety hazard, who should be forced to pay to undo the damage? Should the absolute financial liability rest entirely on the corporate owners and investment funds who walked away from their structural responsibilities? Or is the public inevitably left holding the keys to an empty, multi-million-dollar tomb? Tell me your thoughts in the comments down below. Make sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and share this video if you want to see more deep dives into the hidden, expensive engineering disasters that are quietly shaping the cities of tomorrow. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next investigation.